A lot of time is spent worrying about electric vehicle range, especially from those that don't own or haven't driven one. It of course does play an important part. You'll not want to try to cover massive distances in a 24 kilowatt-hour Leaf or my 2013 Renault Kangoo ZE, at least not with an expectation of getting somewhere in a reasonable amount of time. Range worries are easing as time goes on though. The MG5 long range, for example, is a sub £25,000 250 mile car, and as time goes on I think we'll worry far less about range. But I think there's a new kid in town to replace it: charging speed, both how fast the car can charge and how much power a charger can deliver. Now it's important to note that I'm not concerned with how long it takes to charge your car at home. You'll likely charge it when you're asleep anyway. 7 kilowatt single phase AC charging is what we're pretty much faced with in most UK homes, and that's not going to change anytime soon. DC rapid charging is the name of the game here, and what we're looking at is a 359 mile journey in my Audi e-Tron 55. If you've been here for a while, you'll recall a very similar test of my MG ZS EV. The route this time is very similar: Gloucester to Stirling. Motorway pretty much the entire way, 359 miles door to door, and of course, as always, I turn to a Better Routeplanner, ABRP, for guidance on where to charge. 2 charging stops seemed to be the order of the day for the e-Tron, unless I was willing to cover a large amount of the journey at a restricted speed, which in this instance I definitely wasn't. But immediately, just by looking at the route planner, I could see there was a big difference here, and it wasn't just that we were down to 2 charging stops. They were also considerably shorter. 15 minutes and 18 minutes respectively is what was being suggested. Then that's a total charging time of 33 minutes on the entire journey. Well, I'll believe that when I see it, I suppose, was my initial reaction. Leaving on a Thursday afternoon, I topped off the battery to 100% overnight, breaking my own no home charging rule, but I went from sort of 75% to 100% using the Octopus Go window, so I wasn't too worried about the cost. And I probably didn't need to, in all honesty. There was 2 of us, well 3 if you count Constantine in the back, and some luggage in the boot, so we weren't exactly fully loaded, but not empty either. The charging stops that ABRP had planned weren't exactly pushing the range to its limit, so I don't think I'd need to be particularly concerned with driving with economy in mind. 70 to 80 miles an hour would be the normal cruising speed where possible, exactly as I would do in a petrol or diesel car. I know that some of you in the comments will tell me that you never average less than 100 miles an hour on the motorway, but I just plain don't believe you, to be quite frank. And points do not in fact make prizes, so we're definitely going to limit just how much we exceed the speed limit by. Charging stop number 1 was at MFG Crow Orchard. It's a sort of mini service station just off junction 27 of the M6. Regular viewers will know this is where I had a little bit of trouble with the ZS EV, narrowly avoiding the big yellow taxi with some hot 10mm spanner action. There are 8 150 kilowatt chargers here, so it's a very good option for journeys up the M6, since the chances of actually getting a charge without having to queue are very high. A lot of the comments on ZapMap were from disgruntled e-Tron drivers saying they had to park over 2 spaces because the cables were too short for the stupid charging port location. And I was a little bit worried about this. I was like, oh, am I going to have to look like a stereotypical Audi driver parking over 2 bays just because the cable won't fit? But it turns out that all you need to do is take the CCS cable round the back of the unit and it reaches no problem. They do seem a little bit on the short side, and I think charger manufacturers and installers need to work on that a little bit, but there are no problems. Just with a little bit of thought and care, it's absolutely fine. Sadly, one of the spaces was iced. I suspect the person who works for MTech Petroleum was having a coffee in the on-site Costa. It's a poor show really. There's plenty of parking on site if you open your eyes, and the EV chargers aren't even in a convenient location, given you need to cross the busy petrol forecourt in order to get to the shop. I posted about this on Twitter. Quite a number of you gave them some on Twitter, but unfortunately they never responded. It's a bit poor really, especially given one of their business divisions is involved in both renewable energies and EV charging installation. I'd expect a little bit better. Anyway, contactless payment, 39 pence per kilowatt hour, up and running in seconds, exactly how it should be. Sadly, I was on the hook for this one. MFG isn't included in any of the charge cars that Onto provides, but still the charging speed more than made up for it. It ramped straight up to 105 kilowatts, which isn't far off the maximum these chargers will provide to a 400 volt car. The labelled is 150 kilowatts, but that's for 800 volt architecture only. So good stuff in my eyes. By the time I'd been inside to grab a coffee and use the facilities, I had more than enough range to get to the next stop. Charging for 15 minutes, almost exactly as predicted, we were good to go. No waiting around here, unplugged as I returned from the shop and we were back on the road. That's a bit of a revelation really. It didn't really feel like an inconvenience, and that's quite important. Back on the motorway, the next stop will be at Gretna, where we should really get to see the e-Tron's party piece, because there are 350 kilowatt IONITY chargers there. The traffic had been pretty grim up until now. Congestion, roadworks, average speed cameras absolutely plague that part of the M6. Things were getting a bit clearer though, which meant the average speed could increase a little bit. And the lack of adaptive cruise on this particular car is a little bit of a pain when it's a bit busier and you've got roadworks and all that kind of stuff. But of course the standard cruise control is perfectly adequate when things are a bit quieter and you can just set it to a cruising speed and let it get on with it. Other than that, the e-Tron has been an absolute joy in this journey so far. It's stupendously comfortable, it's well refined, very well insulated from the outside, and the infotainment system is really decent. Even the built-in sat-nav with a live traffic display and stuff was doing quite a good job, although, I mean, it was just keeping me up to date about the traffic jams I was sitting in. It's quite difficult to find effective alternative routes when you're basically just on one motorway for most of the length of the country. Stop number 2 was at Gretna services, where there are 4 IONITY chargers next to the petrol forecourt. The main services building has a couple of old Ecotricity units that haven't quite got round to getting the grid serve treatment yet, and there are some Tesla superchargers. Charging speed is of course the name of the game here though, so the 350 kilowatt IONITY chargers were definitely what I was after. They should be able to deliver the full 150 kilowatts that the e-Tron is capable of and get me back on the road as fast as possible. Cost, of course, not a concern for me in this instance. I needn't worry about the 69 pence per kilowatt hour because it's included with a Shell fuel card that Onto have provided me with. One of the 4 chargers was faulty unfortunately, and from reading comments on ZapMap it seems it's been faulty for a little while now. You would think IONITY would be a little bit more on top of maintenance given those prices, and the fact of course that they're backed by several major manufacturers. It's a little bit disappointing, isn't it? Still, we were soon charging just fine on one of the other units and the speed was absolutely incredible. It was actually showing 151 kilowatts at one point on the display in the car, which is even more impressive given the 150 kilowatt maximum charging speed. 15 minutes again would have been enough here to give me enough range to get to Stirling, but I held on for another 5 minutes or so just to ensure I wasn't completely empty when I arrived. There was ample charging near the hotel, but not actually in the hotel car park itself, so having a few miles in reserve was good, and the extra 5 minutes was of little consequence really. So there we have a 359 mile journey with 2 15-minute stops, one of those extended to 20 minutes through choice. That's much more like it if you ask me. What I've taken from this trip is that ultra rapid charging is the real game changer here. I'm sure if I was driving a more economical car I could have turned that into one stop, but when you're stopping for no longer than it takes to use the facilities and grab a takeaway coffee, it really makes very little difference in reality. It's a completely different experience to when I did the same in my MG ZS EV. Now granted, we're in a car that's pushing 4 times the price, so you would expect the experience to be different, but not having to stop 3 times for 45 minutes each, not having to remotely consider economy in my driving style, and simply having to splash and dash a couple of times meant a journey time of just over 7 hours. With roadworks, congestion in the mix, I'd say that was parity with a petrol or diesel car, give or take a few minutes. I'd need to stop for a coffee and a comfort break at least once on this journey anyway, so there's not enough of a difference for it to be a concern for me anymore. It's not all rosy of course though, I'm painting you a picture. I mean it was a great improvement and I really enjoyed it, but the availability of ultra rapid chargers along trunk roads remains the real bottleneck here. Those 2 stops I made were more or less the only viable ones on the journey, and that will definitely need to change going forward. If people are going to make full use of these charging speeds that more and more modern cars are able to utilise, they're going to need more ultra rapid chargers. 50 kilowatts isn't going to cut it. GridServe's vision of charging hubs at motorway service stations that mirror what they've got in Rugby, and their electric forecourt installations just off the motorways, could be the answer here. And MFG are certainly making themselves out to be a really big player in this market with their rollout of charging facilities at their sites. They really seem to recognise the need for this type of facility, and they seem to be rolling it out very quickly. There we are then. That is my experience of using the e-Tron 55 for a longer journey. I really do think its charging performance is its real party piece, and it more than makes up for any concerns you might have about its efficiency or its overall range. It's also a fantastic tool for the job. It soaks up the motorway, absolutely no problem at all, and it's in its element in this environment, there is no doubt about it. Let me know what you think in the comments. Will charging speed influence your next EV purchase? I'll definitely be considering it to be an important metric as I review more cars in the future, and I think, for now at least, the e-Tron has set a very hard benchmark to beat. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.